Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining me. Hopefully everybody can hear me okay. I'm just going to give a quick background about who I am and the work that I do for folks that are not familiar with me, and then we'll get started with the presentation. My name is Brian Sanderoff. I'm a traditionally trained pharmacist, used to own my own pharmacies in downtown Baltimore, and eventually came to realize that giving people the prescription medicines for their chronic diseases was not really fixing problems. It was really just turning the volume down on what their body was saying to them. And I found that if you could listen to what the body's saying and actually, address that issue, then whatever those problems were have a tendency to go away. And so we don't look from our perspective at things as diseases. We look at them as symptoms, and that's absolutely the case with our topic today as well, and that's anxiety and depression. So I have molded my practice into one where I'm trying to find more solutions than just ways to turn down the volume. The analogy I always give people is that if you are driving around in your car and that little red oil light on your dashboard comes up, you have a couple choices. You can take it to the mechanic and find out what's wrong and get it fixed. Or if you want, you can just take a piece of black tape and put it over the light. And that's what we do in medicine with all the chronic diseases. I'm talking about blood pressure and diabetes and cholesterol and osteoporosis and depression and anxiety. The answers that we come up with in Western medicine are not fixing the problem. They're just turning the volume down on what the body's saying. And the body, in its wisdom, will turn the volume back up. And, when I was in pharmacy school, we were taught that that was a worsening condition. And it's not that at all. It's the body saying, hey, dude, listen to me. And if you're not going to listen to me, then I'm going to find another way to make you listen. And so, um, again, those of you who have heard me talk before have heard me, say these things, and hopefully it makes sense to you. So, also, I want to mention that we have a bunch of people online. When I do these webinars, I have everybody muted because it's really hard to have everybody talk at once and catch the background noise and everything. But that doesn't mean that you can't ask me questions while we're doing the webinar. If something comes up, you can just type it right into that question box. It shows right up on my screen, and then I can address it when it's appropriate to do so. So if I go through something that doesn't make sense, or I need to, say it a different way, let me know. Or if you have a question about something specific, let me know, and I will either answer it right then and there, or if it's going to be addressed later in the presentation, I will let you know that, and we'll answer it when we get to that. Also want to make sure that everybody understands that I am here to support you and your questions, or anything that I can do for you. And so you are welcome to contact me any way that you would like. If you go to the website, which as you can see there is wellbeinggps.com, you can email me, you can get our phone numbers, and you can call me. A lot of what I talk about is general information, and there may be specifics going on with you or somebody that you know, and you want to get an answer specifically to that situation, then please do not hesitate to call or answer or ask me. One of our missions around here is to act as a resource for the public. I also see that more people are coming into the webinar right now as I'm speaking, and I'm really pleased about that. The popularity seems to be increasing. We're getting bigger and bigger crowds for each one of these. The webinars that I do, all of the past ones, including as we go forward, are all recorded on our website in the archives. And so if you listen to this today and you've got somebody that could make use of the information, then you can refer them to the website. And usually by Monday, the following Monday, it's the recording is up. And then all of the old ones are on there as well. The one I did about inflammation and weight loss and cholesterol and menopause and sleep and vitamin D and the flu season. The flu season is a good one to revisit now because it is flu season again is coming upon us. So I think that's it for the housekeeping issues. And for you new people that are just coming on board, again, during the webinar, you are muted, so you can't speak to me, but you do have the opportunity to type in questions into that little question box. And as soon as you do it, it shows right up on my screen, and I will address those questions as is appropriate. So let's get on with today's topic. And again, thank you so much for joining me. Thank you for trusting in me, and being willing to spend some of your precious time during the day in exploring a topic like this. And so, natural solutions to anxiety and depression. So the first thing I want to say is that depression and anxiety are not diseases. This is really just another example of homeostasis in action. So, homeostasis is that process where the body will do whatever it needs to do. It'll make whatever adjustment it needs to make to maintain life. And every chronic disease that we can get is really that. It's really the body doing what it's supposed to do based on the influences that we give it from the outside world. And if we would only look at our quote unquote diseases as that, then we can find a way to make those diseases go away, because really depression and anxiety, as well as everything else, high blood pressure, diabetes, whatever, those are all just ways that the body's trying to tap you on the shoulder, or maybe more hit you on the side of the head with a brick to make you pay attention to something that's out of balance and needs to be fixed. And it's the case with this as well. So how is it possible that depression or anxiety could actually have a positive benefit or a good benefit? And let me explain it to you. So let's imagine that you're a caveman and you're in your little troop of, 12 or 14 people, and you've got a leader, and that leader has become your leader because he's got experience, he or she has got experience, and or has risen to that position based on performance. And it's the leader who helps with the survival of the troop, knows which berries not to eat, and what animals to try to eat and to be able to kill, and where to live, where it's safe and sheltered, and all that sort of stuff. And let's imagine that there's some sort of accident and the leader is killed. Well, depression sets in the group. And the result of that is that they actually don't venture as far away from their cave, and they stay closer to home, and they stay within safer bounds and safer activities until a new leader sort of rises to the top. And it's the same thing with us today. That's homeostasis in action. That's the body actually doing life preservation with what in medicine we call a disease. I also want to point out that being a victim leaves no opportunity to change something yourself. When you're a victim of something, then what that means is that you don't have any power to change that. And there are many people, and I hope that people listening right now, especially if somebody does suffer from anxiety or depression, is hearing this in the way that I'm intending it. It's not about blame, but it is about understanding that you have the opportunity to make change here. And so um, there are many people with depression and anxiety that walk around with the idea that they are a quote unquote victim of their disease. And nothing could be further from the truth. Depression and anxiety are not diseases. They're nothing more than symptoms of the body being out of balance. And if we can listen to why that body is out of balance, we can make those symptoms go away, and then people no longer have depression or anxiety. Hopefully that makes sense to folks. So I also want to ask the question, where has medicine gone wrong when it comes to all this? So number one, they've gone right in the recognition that there are brain chemical imbalances. That's really a tremendous scientific discovery, that there are brain chemicals, we call them neurotransmitters, and when they're out of balance, that's when we can show symptoms like depression or anxiety or OCD or bipolar or eating disorders. I mean, those brain chemicals play a role with or sleeplessness, all sorts of things. So medicine was right in the recognition of that. Where they're wrong is in not asking the very important question, and that is why those imbalances are there in the first place. You go to your doctor and the doctor says you're depressed. He doesn't ask why. He or she doesn't say, let's look into why that chemistry imbalance is there. We want to adjust it from the outside world, and that's what they look to do. So they also don't recognize well that brain chemicals have effects everywhere in your body. Another way to put this is that every cell in your body is eavesdropping on what's going on inside, between your ears. And that lack of recognition is really important. Did you know that there is more neurochemical activity in your stomach than there is in your brain? And so when we see someone that may have depression and we give them a medicine like Prozac that makes adjustments in serotonin levels, one of those brain chemicals that we'll go over in a second, it has its effect all over the body, not just in the brain. It has its effect in the stomach. And that's why these medicines carry side effects with them, like weight gain, like loss of libido, all sorts of supposedly unwanted effects. Well, if we understood or would recognize the full scope of these chemicals throughout the entire body, those wouldn't be unexpected. They would be expected and predicted even. And then medicine is also wrong when they try to adjust these chemicals by altering mechanisms. And we'll talk about that a little bit. And then also the way to look at this from a different perspective and maybe fix these brain chemical imbalances in a different way, understand why they're there in the first place, and then put into action those solutions. So let's talk a little bit about biochemistry. This is usually the part of um, the presentation where I have to apologize for being a bit of a biochemical nerd. And hopefully I'm distilling this information down enough so that it's easy enough to remember and understand. And I think it is important to understand this when to be able to really affect change. And that's why I go over it. So there are some pertinent neurotransmitters, and there's 4 different ones that I'll talk about today. The truth is that there have been identified some 60 plus brain chemicals, neurotransmitters, in the brain or in the body. And they're very important messengers of, they carry a message from one cell to another. And we'll go into that a little bit more in detail. But these are the 4 I want to concentrate on for this discussion. And so number 1 is serotonin. And that has to do with mood regulation, with sleep, and with hunger. And when you have a deficit, that can be associated with depression, sleep issues, anxiety, OCD, bipolar, even some eating disorders. Next one is dopamine. And this has to do with alertness and attention and actually movement as well. And a deficit of this can result in Parkinson's. People that have Parkinson's have issues with either making dopamine or dopamine working the way it's supposed to from one cell to another. If you have too much of it, you actually can have a psychosis, including schizophrenia. Norepinephrine that's the one that has to do with fight or flight. And it has to do with alertness, arousal, mood elevation, and a deficit is associated with being depressed. And then the last one is called GABA, GABA. And this is the brain's major inhibitory neurotransmitter. It's sort of like the brakes on the car. And so when things are going downhill, it's GABA. When I say downhill, I mean like the car is starting to drift downhill and things are going faster and faster, especially in relation to anxiety. GABA is the brakes. And so deficits in GABA are related to anxiety, insomnia, and even seizures. And many prescription medicines that we would use for anxiety, like benzodiazepines, like Valium or Xanax, they actually help to enhance GABA levels in a biochemical way. GABA, by the way, stands for gamma aminobutyric acid, just in case you're interested. All right, so this is how they all sort of interact with each other. And so all of them have to do with mood. Serotonin and dopamine have to do with anxiety, and that just sort of talks about what they do in the body as well. So let's take a closer look at a nerve cell and how it works. And I think it's important to understand this in order to best visualize what is happening and how we look to treat things from a holistic perspective. So this is a nerve cell here. And as you come down the nerve cell, basically what happens is an electrical signal travels down in one nerve cell, causing it to release neurotransmitters into the space in between 2 cells, which is called the synapse. And so you have these vesicles, which are basically storage unit for the neurotransmitters. The vesicle comes to the end of the nerve ending and releases the neurotransmitter into the synapse or that space. The neurotransmitter will travel across the gap and bind to a protein on the receiving cell. That's called a receptor site. And this can cause a change in this cell. And that change could be electrical, chemical, or mechanical, how it works, or the signal that it's going to send to the next cell. The neurotransmitter and the receptor site are specific to each other like a lock and key. And neurotransmitters can excite the receiving cell to cause a response or inhibit the receiving cell from stimulation. And so this neurotransmitter could be GABA, could be serotonin, could be epinephrine, could be histamine, could be anything. So how do pharmaceuticals work? Well, one way or another, what they look to do is manipulate neurotransmitter levels in the brain. And they can do this in a bunch of different ways. Here is how the prescription medicine Prozac, or that group of drugs which are called selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, this is how they work. So, as we said, you've got these neurotransmitters in the synapse to react on these receptor sites. And the more they react on these receptor sites, the more of the reaction happens on this, on the receiving cell. Well, once they've gone and done their job, they get taken back up into the cell where they then get stored again for usage later. This is called reuptake. Well, Prozac and Zoloft and Paxil and that whole group of drugs, what they do is they are selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. So they stop this process. So what that does is it keeps more of that neurotransmitter in the synapse in between so that it can react more. So if you've got anxiety or depression because you have low levels of serotonin, it makes sense in a topical way that if you have more serotonin in the synapse, then the reaction happens more and you have less of those things. But there's some other questions here. Number one, also, there's another part of this mechanism that's called a negative feedback. There's a little receptor site over here that when it detects enough of this in the synapse, enough of these neurotransmitters, it tells, don't make any more. You've already got enough of it. And so there's a negative feedback loop when you have too much of a neurotransmitter like serotonin or GABA or whatever here. So what's the downside to this approach? Well, number one, there's the depletion of the neurotransmitters. You are not doing anything to allow for those neurotransmitters to be taken back into that cell to be stored to be used again, and you're constantly down-regulating the cell, making more of that neurotransmitter. And you're not doing anything to increase the root material that the body needs to make more of these neurotransmitters. And so this is where dependence comes in. Many people who have been on an antidepressant like Prozac have found that at first it works and then it stops working and you need a higher dose and then you need to try a different medicine. And that's because of this depletion of the neurotransmitters. Another downside is the side effects, and that we talked about before. Serotonin doesn't have an effect just in your brain. It has effects in every cell in your body, and a major site of effect is in your stomach, and how your body's going to use calories and how you're going to regulate appetite. And so we get these side effects or these unwanted effects. I don't like to say surprise effects, because if we just understand basic biochemistry and would recognize the fact that neurotransmitters have actions everywhere in the body, then it wouldn't be a surprise to guess that there would be other side effects or other effects in the body. And then the third thing is that science has shown us that long-term use of these medicines has actually caused physical changes in how those receptor sites work. So if we have a lock and a key, and the key fits into the lock, but we do something that actually makes the lock change, then the key doesn't fit into the lock anymore. And that also has been shown to be a problem with using these medicines long-term. So then that begs the question, well, what's the holistic approach? And that really is the meat of what we want to talk about today. And I also want to remind everybody that's listening right now that if you have a question, type it right in. I'll see it right away and be able to answer it for you, because I know I'm going through a lot of information and some of it a little bit quickly. So what is the holistic approach? Well, it's sort of a five-pronged approach as far as I'm concerned. And so those are, number one, let's try to understand the cause. Let's fill in the gap where medicine left off or dropped off, and that was be willing to ask why that brain chemistry imbalance is there in the first place. Number two, we're going to find that we have to eliminate negative habits, and I'll explain to you what those negative habits are and how they affect that brain chemistry, how they answer question number one. And then we want to instill the positive habits that can have the opposite effect. We want to do something that I call breaking cycles, and I'll talk to you about why and how. And then number five, we want to optimize biochemistry, and that's sometimes where the supplements come in and can be very, very helpful tools with this issue. So let's go through each one individually. So understanding causes. Well, First thing I'm going to write up here is that we have to know when anxiety or depression is normal. And what I mean by that is it's actually okay and even expected to have feelings and to feel sad and to feel grief when it's appropriate, like when you lose someone or something that's important to you. And there's also appropriate times to have fears about certain things as well. So, share a story with you. And this is a common story that I have seen over my years in my practice. And that is that we have somebody whose parent dies or whose spouse dies. And now it's been a month, and people in their lives are telling them, it's time for you to get over this. And you go to the doctor, and the doctor says, you really shouldn't be depressed about this. I'm going to give you vitamin P. That's what we call Prozac around here, vitamin P. And so, in essence, what the doctor is saying is that your depression is really just a Prozac deficiency, and that just is not the case. Now, who's to say that after a month, your grieving should be over? It's going to be individual for each one of us. And my experience is that when you do something to numb yourself from that grieving, that the grieving doesn't stop. You're just not aware of it. It goes underneath the surface and it gets worse, and it sort of festers. And then when it does come to the surface, maybe later in life, maybe a year or 5 or 10 years down the road, it's much worse than it was in the beginning. And I know this is hard to believe, but I've had people who have come to me with the story that their doctor gave them a prescription for something a week or two after a major loss of a spouse, going through a divorce, loss of a parent, loss of a child. And so I want to put up there that it's absolutely normal to have anxiety and or depression at certain times. There's grief and sadness, there's fear and worry, and and they're warranted at times. I also want to recognize genetics as part of this topic, because there are folks that have a genetic predisposition towards certain brain chemistry imbalances. And we certainly do see things like anxiety and depression running in families. But this is where the idea or the concept of genetic expression comes in, and what can be done to get your genes to express themselves in a different way. So I'm going to try to explain this. I've explained this probably with every one of my webinars because it affects every one of the chronic diseases that we could talk about. And that is that your genes are like a Star Trek episode. You have different possible futures. Which future comes to pass is going to depend on how you bathe your genes in your experiences: diet, exercise, lifestyle, and maybe most importantly, coping mechanisms, how you deal with stress. So if you have a genetic tendency towards something, you can sort of think of that as the weak link or a weakness. And maybe it's depression, maybe it's high blood pressure, maybe it's diabetes, maybe it's anxiety, maybe it's hormonal imbalances or immune dysfunction or migraine headaches or gut issues. We all have our genetic tendencies or weaknesses, but your genes could express themselves in the worst possible way, and you'll end up suffering from whatever that weakness is, or they could express themselves in the best possible way, and you'll never have a problem with that. So let's say we have a family where depression runs in the family, and they've got 3 kids, and 2 kids have depression and 1 doesn't. Is it because the one who doesn't didn't get the depressive gene? No, it's because that one got the wherewithal to do things that have their genes express themselves in a different way. So the reason we see things running in families is, well, we do have those genetic weaknesses, but what is it that we learn from our parents? Our diet, exercise, lifestyle, and maybe most importantly, our coping mechanisms. How we deal with stress. That's what we learn from our parents, and that's what makes our genes express themselves one way versus another. Okay, so hopefully that's clear. The next thing is, let's look at what we can and cannot change. And this is really a key. There are those of us that cannot seem to let go of our ideas of just how things are supposed to be. And oftentimes, these are the folks that end up with issues like anxiety and depression, basically brain chemistry imbalances. So our perception and our ability or inability to let go of control of things plays a really important role with making these symptoms go away. And again, you'll never get me to say that depression is a disease. It's a symptom. It is an indication of these processes going on underneath the surface. And it's, in essence, your body asking for attention to those and hopefully making changes. And so there are, it's like the serenity prayer. There are things that we can control and things that we can't. And, we're asking God to give us the wisdom to know the difference between those two. Change the things we can and let go of the things that we can't control. And that is a big issue with people that suffer from anxiety and depression, because when we have in our heads an idea that something is supposed to go a certain way and it doesn't go that way, it causes all sorts of tension, angst inside our body, and that's what leads to genetic expression that leads to brain chemistry imbalances. And Prozac doesn't fix that. It may adjust the brain chemistry, usually not in a permanent way, but it doesn't fix that underlying issue. Okay, so how about eliminating negative habits? Well, what are those habits, and why do we have to eliminate them in the first place? First one I'm going to put down here is caffeine. And I'm going to explain why caffeine plays a role with this, especially with anxiety, but depression as well. So adenosine is a brain chemical that acts again as the brakes when cellular activity gets to a certain point. So when, we're going back to that picture with the brain cells, with the nerve cells, when you have activity, that also releases this neurochemical called adenosine. And this is actually sort of the brakes on that activity. And it keeps things from going too far with activity, either using up materials and or one of the things that can happen with a seizure is that there's no brakes, and so it's like a storm that happens, and it starts at one point and it kind of spreads outward because there's no brakes on the activity of those cells. Well, adenosine is the brake, and caffeine is an adenosine blocker, in effect, removing the brakes from the cell activity, from brain cell activity. Caffeine also increases adrenal output and adrenaline and cortisol, in essence, bringing about that fight or flight response. And if you think of somebody that is already anxious and then we put into effect fight or flight, it makes them more anxious. And that's why caffeine is such a problem. Alcohol is another one of those things that we have to change. Now, we all know that this is a depressant. Now, there's some people who drink alcohol and they get more gregarious and they think, wow, this is like an upper. But it's not. It's a depressant, but what it's doing is depressing your filter. And so if normally you're reserved and that filter of being reserved is depressed, you're not reserved anymore and you're more outgoing. And that's what makes you, and this is why we like to drink when we're at a party or, in a social situation like that. But what it does is it also increases GABA levels, but to a greater extent than what would be warranted normally. It also inhibits dopamine levels. And remember, dopamine had to do with movement. And so that's why you can get motor skill degeneration when you're drinking. And the more you drink, the more that happens. Sugar and processed carbohydrates are important about that as well. Let's see. We got a question from Nancy here and says, what about all the benefits we keep hearing about these days from coffee, i.e. preventing Alzheimer's? Could you get the same benefits from decaf without triggering anxiety issues? Really good question. I'm glad that you brought that up, Nancy. I appreciate that. So you have to understand that anytime there's something that is a commodity on the marketplace, there are reasons to for somebody to want you to consume that. And that's the case with coffee. And as the downside to coffee is put out into the public, it's like this battle. It becomes like a public affairs battle. And the other side, and it's the people who ultimately sell coffee or produce coffee that want to then say, but wait a second, there's a good benefit to it. There are components of coffee that can be good for you. There are antioxidants that are in coffee, and there are antioxidants that are in chocolate. And it is true that they can have a benefit for you, but the risks or the bad sides far outweigh the benefits. And so short term, and I'm sure many people that are listening right now have actually experienced this, short term, you drink a cup of coffee and you feel sharper. And that's because we've taken a little bit of the brakes off of the cells working. And so we feel a little bit sharper, able to focus and concentrate. That's where the connection to Alzheimer's comes in. But what happens is that overextended use of this, and that's not necessarily just years. Sometimes extended use can just be a couple weeks where people start to notice that, ooh, that one cup of coffee doesn't do it anymore for my brain power or my energy. And so then you start with the second cup, and then it's a cup in the afternoon because you want to feel as sharp in the afternoon as you do in the morning, and you can see how that goes down a spiral. And there's a depletion of these neurotransmitters that happens with continued use of chemicals like this. Same thing with nicotine. I mean, we can find some good benefits from nicotine. But smoking is not good for you, and drinking coffee is not good for you either. And so that depletion leads to starting from a more and more depleted state. That's why you need more and more of it. And so even though there is a lobby out there that wants to tell you there's good things in this, it's not so good. If you love coffee, part of that is just a self-care ritual. For many of us, waking up in the morning, taking some time for ourselves, going through a ritual, there's an aroma, there's a warmth that happens with that. And so replacing that ritual with maybe one that is healthier for you, like using an herbal tea, there's a warmth, there's an aroma, but there's none of the downside with the caffeine. That's where we sort of fall short. And it's the same thing with chocolate. Nancy, thank you so much for asking that question. Okay, so sugar and processed carbs are also very, very important. Insulin levels have an interesting effect on serotonin levels. And again, serotonin plays a role with depression and anxiety. At first, insulin actually increases serotonin. That's why eating chocolate can feel good at first. And that's why, women that are having some PMS, they crave chocolate. Or people that are feeling down crave carbohydrates because it raises that insulin level. And at first, that raises your serotonin level. But as the sugar crash happens, that's where the opposite starts to occur. And extended elevated insulin levels leads to inflammation, sugar issues, and adrenal output, all of which contribute to furthering the brain chemistry imbalance. Hopefully that makes sense to you guys. So getting the processed and refined carbs out of your diet is really, really important. Now notice it says sugar. So obviously I'm talking about cakes and candy and donuts and chocolate and all that sort of stuff. But it also says processed carbs. And so for most of us, and especially if we suffer from depression, anxiety, anything that results from a brain chemistry imbalance, for you, a piece of 12 grain whole wheat bread or a half of a 12 grain whole wheat bagel is just like a Snickers bar. And they're both very detrimental to you and your body. And then the last thing I want to put up here is perpetuating negativity. So even just our thoughts affect our brain chemistry. Your body cannot differentiate between reality and thoughts. In other words, every cell in your body is eavesdropping on what's going on in between your ears. So here's a little demonstration of that, an illustration of that. So let's imagine that you hate going to the dentist. As a kid, you had some traumatic experiences at the dentist. You had some fillings, and it's all of that went along with it, and you absolutely hate going to the dentist. But now as an adult, you do what you're supposed to do, and that's go to the dentist and get your teeth cleaned every 6 months, whatever. But you absolutely dread it. And so here you are, it's Thursday, and you have an appointment with the dentist in 2 weeks. And for the next 2 weeks, you dread going to the dentist. You think about sitting in that chair, and you think about that smell that's unique to the dentist's office, and you think about the sounds of the drills and the cleaning and the bleeding gums and blah, blah, blah. Your body does not realize that you're not sitting in that dental chair right now. And for that entire 2 weeks, you are creating the chemistry and the genetic expression that leads to brain chemistry imbalances, even though you're not even in that chair. And it's because your body can't distinguish between a movie that's showing on a screen, which is your brain, and that actually happening. And so one of the mechanisms to stop perpetuating that negativity is to say to yourself, you know what, I hate going to the dentist, but right now I'm not in the dentist chair. I don't have to think about it. In a couple weeks, I will. And every day you go through that. And then it's the day before. It's like, oh my God, I got to go to the dentist tomorrow. And you say, wait a second, but right now I'm not in that dental chair. You remind your body of that. And your body has a different state of biochemistry, including brain chemicals. And then tomorrow, when tomorrow comes and you have to sit in the dental chair, then you can deal with it, you can experience it, and then you can be done with it instead of experiencing it for 2 weeks. Hopefully everybody understands that. Okay, number 3 is to instill the positive habits. Number one is sleep. And it's about getting enough sleep, and it's getting the sleep that is restorative. It's getting sleep at the appropriate time. Now, I did a whole webinar, a whole hour just about sleep, and I would encourage you to go, to the archive and listen to that because it's good information that will support what I'm telling you now. Generally, adults need somewhere between 6 and 8 hours of sleep a night, but it's also when you get that sleep. Key time for regeneration and repair for your body, key time for balancing hormones and balancing brain chemistry is between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. And it's said that for every hour that you miss between that time, it takes 2 hours to make up. So if you're going to get 6 or 7 hours of sleep a night, let's say you're a person that gets 7 hours of sleep a night and you go to bed at midnight and you wake up at 7, that same 7 hours will benefit you differently by going to bed at 10 and waking up at 5. And the way the world is today with our technology, you can reprogram your life completely. Meaning that whatever you would do between 10 and 12, whether it's watch something specific on TV or surf the internet or whatever, you can do that at 5 in the morning as well. You can record those things, and so you can reprogram your life, and your body will work differently, including brain chemistry. So this is directly related to depression and anxiety, getting sleep at the proper time. Also want to tell you that inadequate sleep leads to adrenal output, and that also causes the genetic expression that leads to brain chemistry imbalances in susceptible people. Last thing about sleep is that lack of dreaming is an indication of low serotonin levels. And so even if you get the proper amount of sleep at the proper time, if you're not dreaming, you're not getting that restorative sleep, and brain chemistry needs to be addressed. Number two is exercise. So, everybody knows the benefits of exercise. Obviously, helps you use sugar more efficiently. I just told you about how sugar, plays a role, insulin levels, and all that kind of stuff. Hold on one second. We got a question from Kelly, and that is, should you always remember your dreams? No. It'd be good if you did, because I think there's useful information for you, but that's not the point of this. If you wake up in the morning and you've been dreaming, and then 2 minutes later it's gone, but you still know that you were dreaming, that's what I'm looking for here. You don't have to remember those dreams. Thanks, Kelly, for that question. Now, interestingly enough, dream recall is like a muscle, and the more you exercise it, the bigger that muscle gets. And so I am a proponent of keeping a dream journal, and when you first wake up in the morning, jotting down what your dream was. Even if it's just vestiges of it, all I remember is this, person from second grade and we were coloring together or whatever. And as you do this and as you flex that muscle, you'll find that your recall gets better. And so dream journaling can be very helpful in helping you to recall your dreams better, and then also to help learn from your dreams. Good question. I appreciate that. So, exercise is helpful because it can help your body use sugar more efficiently. There was a study done specifically with people that had mild to moderate depression, and they took 3 groups of people. One they gave Prozac, one they gave a combination of Prozac and exercise, and one they just gave an exercise regimen to. And at the end of the study, the group that benefited the most for the longest was the exercise alone group. And there can be lots of reasons for this. I mean, it helps balance brain chemistry, helps your body handle sugar. I think it's also a coping mechanism. It's a way of us sort of dispersing and dispelling all of that pent up energy that we can have from our activities that are stressful. Hopefully that makes sense to you. Diet, very important. Again, we talked about the sugars. Also tell you that adrenal function is a key issue here. And proteins, especially in the morning, really help adrenal function. And so if you wake up and you have bread, or if you have pancakes or French toast or cereal for breakfast, you should experience having proteins for breakfast for a period of time, a couple weeks, and see what happens to stress, how your body responds to stress, and ultimately brain chemistry balance, which can result in differences in depression and anxiety. So, waking up and going to work, having had those carbs, and especially if work is stressful, that's what lends itself to this sort of problem. Got another question here, and that is, what about sugar from fruit? Should that be limited? As long as you're eating the fruit the way nature provided it, That's a much safer way to go, and that can be overdone as well. So, making a big fruit smoothie in the morning sometimes can be an issue because it's too sweet. If you're going to go and eat an apple, that's great. If you're going to have apple juice, that's not so great because you're getting the sugar from 6 or 8 apples, and you wouldn't sit there and eat 6 or 8 apples. Thank you for that question. I appreciate that. Okay, and then the last thing is this idea of stress reduction techniques. So learning to interact with your environment in a different way. I love guided meditation as a tool for this. And we have a great practitioner here. Her name is Randy. You can learn about her by going to the website. She's a clinical hypnotherapist, and when she does sessions with people, she can record guided meditations for people to then listen to on a regular basis to help with sleep, to help with anxiety or depression or whatever. And that's a great way to get some help as well. The next thing on here is breaking cycles. And so the only thing I want to say to that is that sometimes it's really necessary to stop the runaway train to be able to sort of start over again. So we have a nervous system that's completely out of control. And this is where the use of pharmaceuticals sometimes can be appropriate. And so if you've got anxiety or panic that's completely out of control, all of these other things that I've talked about, it may not be within your you may not have the wherewithal to actually make changes in your diet and start to get exercise and sleep properly. And you need something to break that cycle. So that's sometimes where those medicines can be helpful, whether we're talking about antidepressants or anti-anxiety medicines or whatever. But that's a short-term goal, and that's a short-term measure. And that's another mistake that medicine makes, because you go to the doctor and you're saying, hey, I'm feeling anxious, and he puts you on Xanax. He doesn't say, okay, a week later, let's stop the Xanax. You're out of his office. And being out of his office, is comfortable for him and is comfortable for you. And that usually perpetuates. And then before you know it, it's not just a half a milligram anymore, and it's not just once a day. Okay, so now how about optimizing biochemistry? And there's two sort of areas to this. There's direct and indirect. The first one is fish oil. Understand that every membrane of every cell in your body, including nerve and brain cells, is made up of fats. And things that are supposed to go in and out of cells and react on receptor sites on other cells, if you imagine in your mind that picture that I showed you earlier, it can't happen without those fats being in that membrane the way it's supposed to be. Postpartum depression is nothing more than an essential fatty acid deficiency. And the reason why is because you turn your body into a factory. Baby gets first rights to all the good stuff, including the healthy fats. Many of us are teetering on the edge of an essential fatty acid deficiency. Baby's born. All those fats go right to the milk, intended by nature to nourish that baby and help with the proper nourishment and development of all that brain and nerve tissue. And mom falls off the edge. And that's what postpartum depression is. And I've had cases where postpartum depression has turned around in a matter of days from taking an appropriate dose of fish oil. And for moms that are pregnant and moms that are nursing, if you supplement with fish oil through all that, much higher chance of avoiding that sort of problem, if that makes any sense to you. All sorts of forms and dosages, and I would refer you to their website to learn more about that. I will tell you that my favorite product when it comes to that realm is called Whole Mega by a company called New Chapter. 4 capsules a day, 2 with breakfast, 2 with dinner, can really play a role with anxiety and depression. So the next thing are neurotransmitter precursors. Now, this is different than trying to adjust brain chemistry with pharmaceuticals, because this leaves the decision making up to your body. In essence, what we would be doing is giving to your body the materials and saying, hey, if you need more serotonin, then go ahead and take this, 5-HTP or Ltryptophan. These are 2 precursors to serotonin. Now, the difference between the two is that tryptophan does not cross the blood-brain barrier, and the body has to convert tryptophan into 5-hydroxytryptophan, 5-HTP, and that is a slow step. 5-HTP then crosses the blood-brain barrier, and then your body will use that to make 5-HT, which is also known as serotonin. But you could take 5-HTP, cut out one of the processes there, and it's much more effective. Or you could take GABA as a supplement. And GABA, again, is inhibitory. GABA is the neurotransmitter that are the brakes that calm things down. And so for anxiety and sleep, GABA is really, really helpful. So let's say you have depression and or anxiety and you sleep but you don't dream. 5-HTP would be the best option for you. Let's say you're under that condition but you do dream. GABA would be a better choice for you because that dreaming is an indication of having adequate serotonin levels. So you just need the calming. And GABA is great to use during the day as well. I also want to point out that folic acid is a very important nutrient. It's one of the B vitamins, and it is needed for the making of brain chemicals, certain brain chemicals, including serotonin and norepinephrine. It's a cofactor, and without folic acid there, your body can't make those. But, and this is a big but, it's the active form of folic acid that you need. And so what happens is you get folic acid from your diet, your body converts it into the active form, which is called 5-methyl tetrahydrofolate. You can see why we call it 5-MTHF. It's easier to remember. And then that's what's needed. Now, there is a genetic quirk where about a third of the population cannot convert folic acid into its active form. And there's another third of the population that, because of gut dysfunction, can't do that conversion either. So there's a good 2/3 of the population, some 70%, that have inadequate mechanisms to make the active form of folic acid. And so that is a genetic reason why someone could have a tendency towards brain chemistry imbalances. And it's easy enough to fix. You take the active form of folic acid as a supplement. And with some of my patients with anxiety and or depression or other brain chemical imbalances, symptoms of that, meaning OCD or whatever, taking 5-MTHF can be like a light switch changing, and it makes life completely different. Got a question from Christy here, and that is, where do you get active folic acid? The only way you can get it is from a supplement. Nature doesn't supply you active folic acid. It supplies you with folic acid, which then your body is supposed to convert. And so for people that have this genetic quirk and or specific gut dysfunction, that's where you need to get it from a supplement. And so there's different dosages of it. I'll use anywhere from 1 milligram to 2 milligrams to 10 milligrams a day. Oftentimes with depression and or anxiety, I have somebody take 5 milligrams of MTHF twice a day. It's available over the counter. There's specialty companies that make it. The one that I use is by a company called Thorne Research. And be happy to talk to any individual further about whether that's right for them if they need. There's no downside to doing that I know of. The fourth supplement that I'll tell you about that affects brain chemistry directly is L-theanine. Now, this is an amino acid, and it's interesting. It actually comes from coffee or tea, comes from tea, and it increases GABA levels, just like Valium or Xanax or Ativan does, or many other prescription medicines. But without any side effects or dependence or tolerance issues. And I think it's also tremendously interesting that with tea, nature has provided you with caffeine, which is the upper, and theanine, which is the antidote for too much upper, right in the same package as well. And theanine is a product that I use a lot for anxiety for patients with really good results. Then there's optimizing biochemistry sort of indirectly. And there are things that have to do with supporting the adrenal glands. As we talked about, there's a direct link between your adrenals, stress, and genetic expression to the negative, which with certain susceptible people results in brain chemistry imbalances. So doing adrenal support with herbs and nutrients that are known as adaptogens like ginseng or licorice or ashwagandha or schizandra or arctic roots, there's a whole bunch of them. And I like formulas. And so one of my favorite formulas to put people on is called Power Adapt by a company called Natura Health Products. And Power Adapt has a combination of these herbs, and it's really good for calming, and especially when anxiety and depression are stress related. So, someone gets a new job, boss is a nightmare, and all of a sudden they start showing up with depression, even though they have a family history of that. They never had a problem with it before. Now all of a sudden they do. It's not a Prozac deficiency, and doing some adrenal support can be very helpful for that. Got a question from Sandy, and that says, are these supplements recommended for children with anxiety issues? Yes and no, depending on what the issue is. And that is where we have to get, sort of individual. Some of these supplements we use, like the L-theanine, we use with children with anxiety and with ADD, ADHD issues with a very good success. The folic acid I would use in lower amounts, like 1 milligram twice a day instead of 5 milligrams twice a day for a child, and I've had good success with that as well. 5-HTP and GABA are also nutrients that I've used with children with very good results. Dosages is going to depend on what's going on with somebody and age and size and all that sort of stuff. Then there's also cortisol modulators. And thank you for that question, Sandy. I appreciate it. There's also cortisol modulators because, again, cortisol plays a very important role with all of this. And when you're under stress and cortisol is released into the bloodstream, that's what can lead to these ultimately negative genetic expressions that lead to brain chemistry imbalances. And so there's this thing called casein tryptic hydrolysate. We call it CTH. And it actually clears cortisol from your blood quickly. There's only one product that I know of that has this in it, or one company that makes it called Metagenics. The product is called Nucera, and it's a chewable tablet. And I've had very good success with using this for people when they get into a situation that they know is going to be anxiety producing. So, if I have somebody that doesn't like to drive on the highway, they take one of these before they drive on the highway and they're much calmer. Or someone that's going to make has a talk in front of a group and they're uncomfortable with that. For me, I use one before I go into a poker tournament, and it helps calm things so that when I get those pocket aces, my hands aren't shaking all over the place. Phosphatidylserine, also known as PS, is another nutrient that is a specific kind of fat that plays a role with cells being able to communicate with each other, and also has been shown to help lower cortisol levels. And so there's a product that we have that's called Cortisol Manager that we use a lot for people for sleep or for during the day with stress-related cortisol issues. So if you go to sleep just fine, but sometime in the middle of the night you wake up and your mind is racing because you're thinking about what's going to happen at work tomorrow or next week, that's you woke up because you had a cortisol spike. Cortisol is supposed to be low, and that's when it goes up, that's what wakes you up and keeps you from being able to sleep. And so Cortisol Manager before you go to sleep helps to head that off a little bit. And then there's also sorts of sleep enhancers. And again, we talked about how sleep is so important to this. So melatonin is one of those ingredients that can help. And interestingly enough, melatonin and serotonin are in balance with each other. So when you raise your melatonin levels, that will also naturally raise your serotonin levels if need to be. So in conclusion, number one, please recognize that anxiety and depression are symptoms. They're not diseases. Number two, if there are brain chemical imbalances, then we need to ask why they're there, discover the answer, and make adjustments so that those brain chemistry imbalances go away. There are many, many lifestyle issues that affect depression and anxiety. Hopefully for people that suffer from depression and anxiety, this is very empowering. This is license for you to go out and make some changes that will affect your health in a positive way that don't include doctors and tests and prescription medicines that have side effects to them. Number four, there are a lot of supplements that can offer help without the same kind of side effects that you can get from those meds. So you'll notice I didn't talk about St. John's wort as a supplement. That can be helpful. But as I say that depression is not a Prozac deficiency, it's not a St. John's wort deficiency either. And St. John's wort, one way or another, sort of has that same chemical effect, although much less side effects. But again, it's not my choice to cover up the problem. I want to get to the root of what that is. So that's my story, and I am sticking to it. What's coming up in the next few months? We do one of these webinars every month. And so in October, I'm going to do one that's called the Essential 6, a supplement that every one of us should be taking the supplements. The next month in November will be about digestion, where really it's the very beginning and end of health. And then the month after that is about insulin levels and how that is really key to chronic disease. I'll also tell you that on the website are our archives where we have all of our old webinars. This one will be up probably by Monday. And so if you found this information useful, you want to share it with somebody else, then please refer them to the website, and they will, they will get this information as well. This complete presentation exactly as we did it. And again, I would encourage you, please do not be shy about contacting me anytime. You can do it through the website. From the website, you can get my phone number, call right to my office. You can email me. I'm pretty good about getting back to people, and we can have a conversation about whatever is on your mind as well. And again, thank you so much for trusting in me and spending some of your time with me this afternoon. And I look forward to that happening again. Good day.